and of Meghalaya.
Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I'm Tanvi Taneja, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Julia Chapman.
Thanks, Tanvi. Coming up, trade talks continue between the UK and India. Ukraine denounces elections in occupied regions, and America marks the anniversary of 9/11. But first, the headlines.
India and the United Kingdom hold their 12th annual economic financial dialogue in New Delhi. Both sides express commitment to expedite the free trade agreement. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud sign 8 agreements in their talks in New Delhi. And rescuers are racing against time in Morocco to find survivors of a quake that killed nearly 2,500. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has described Saudi Arabia as one of the country's most important strategic partners. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud have signed 8 agreements in restricted-level talks held in New Delhi earlier today. The two leaders discussed energy security, trade and investment, defense, healthcare, food security and cultural issues. They also co-chaired the first leaders' meeting of the India-Saudi Arabia Strategic Partnership Council.
हमने हमारी करीबी साझेदारी को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जाने के लिए कई इनिशिएटिव की पहचान की है। आज की हमारी बैठक से हमारे संबंधों को एक नई ऊर्जा, एक नई दिशा मिलेगी और हमें मिलकर मानवता की भलाई के लिए काम करते रहने की प्रेरणा मिलेगी।
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud have signed MOUs after their restricted-level meeting in New Delhi on Monday. India and Saudi Arabia have signed agreements on a new economic corridor linking the Middle East, India and Europe. The new trade and infrastructure route was announced during the G20 summit and will include pipelines for electricity and hydrogen. India and Saudi Arabia today signed 8 agreements, as we told you. These are in various fields, including energy, digitalization and electronic manufacturing, small and medium enterprise banks, among others. Both the nations identified key areas to work together and strengthen their cooperation.
During this visit, as many as 8 agreements have been signed. In addition to these, there are several other agreements which are under various stages of discussion. The prominent one is the one on grid connectivity, which is in the advanced stages of discussion. We are also separately discussing with the Saudi side a visa waiver agreement for diplomatic passports, which is not yet ready, but we hope that it would be ready soon.
India and Saudi Arabia also have emphasized on expediting the free trade agreement FTA negotiations and cooperation in the fintech sector.
There are so many different areas in which the two countries could cooperate, and the two sides identified areas such as energy cooperation, defense, security, education, technology, transportation, healthcare, tourism and culture. Both sides also identified space and semiconductors as other areas of cooperation.
So there have been trade ties between India and Saudi Arabia for thousands of years. In recent times, the two nations have become economic and cultural partners.
Diplomatic relations between India and Saudi Arabia were established soon after the former gained independence in 1947. Presently, Saudi Arabia is India's 4th largest trading partner. The Gulf Kingdom is also among the top suppliers of crude oil to India. the ties between the two nations are not limited to economy. Nearly 2.2 million Indians live in Saudi Arabia, making them the largest expatriate community in the country. In a major boost to bilateral cultural ties, Saudi Arabia increased India's Hajj quota by 30,000 in 2019. The number now stands at 200,000 per year. India currently sends the second highest number of pilgrims for Hajj after Indonesia. High-level engagements between New Delhi and Riyadh have increased in recent times. In 2016, during his visit to Saudi Arabia, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was conferred with the kingdom's highest civilian honor, the Order of King Abdulaziz. 3 years later, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman visited India. During the coronavirus pandemic, India provided 4.5 million Covishield vaccines to the kingdom in 2021, while Saudi Arabia sent liquid oxygen to India during the second wave of COVID. This year, the kingdom helped India evacuate its citizens from conflict-hit Sudan. As part of India's Operation Kaveri, the evacuations were carried out via Saudi Arabian port of Jeddah, where a transit facility was set up. In August, Saudi Arabia became one of the 6 countries that have been invited to join Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, or the BRICS group, in 2024.
Earlier in the morning, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud received a ceremonial welcome at Rashtrapati Bhavan, the residence of President of India in New Delhi. India's President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed the Crown Prince at the President's official residence. The Saudi leader is on a 3-day visit to New Delhi, which started with the G20 summit, for which he congratulated India for holding a successful G20 presidency. During the G20 summit, world leaders announced an ambitious infrastructure deal to connect India, the Middle East, and Europe with railway and shipping trade routes. Part of the corridor will link the Indian port of Mundra to Fujairah port in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Railway networks via Saudi Arabia and Jordan will then transport goods to Israel's Haifa port. Then goods can go on to ports in France, Germany, and Italy in Europe. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor offers a bridge of peace. Israel's Haifa port will feature in part of a wider trade and infrastructure project.
Now the state of Israel is becoming a different type of transit state. It's becoming a central junction in global economy and a bridge of peace that transforms us. We have already made Israel a central junction in the fields of cyber, water and gas. And we will now do it also with transportation, energy and global communications. I think it's a very great blessing.
India and the United Kingdom expressed their commitment for an early conclusion of the Free Trade Agreement, FTA, between the two countries on Monday. My colleague Julia Chapman is in London. She tracks this story and other stories making headlines around the world. Let's go over to Julia now. Julia, over to you.
After the G20 summit, the UK and India have held talks on a free trade agreement in New Delhi. Representatives attended the 12th India-UK Economic and Financial Dialogue. Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said there's an opportunity to establish a secure and inclusive financial framework.
With emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, redefining financial services, and India's new Digital Personal Data Protection Act, there are ample opportunities for both nations to collaborate on frameworks for secure and inclusive financial intermediation. The success of the UK-India Green Growth Equity Fund is a testament to the efficacy of public-private partnerships in channeling large-scale sustainable finance.
Meanwhile, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, said that India's government is considering allowing Indian companies to list directly on the London Stock Exchange.
We are particularly pleased to have made a big step forward with the first confirmation by India that it will explore the London Stock Exchange as an international destination for the direct listing of Indian companies. And alongside that, there is a new pensions and insurance partnership, the establishment of knowledge and expertise sharing, and of course, the new UK infrastructure financing bridge and a deepened partnership on the development of Gift City. So we can really support each other's plans to strengthen our relationship, and the next step for this is a comprehensive free trade agreement and bilateral investment treaty.
In Russia, the Eastern Economic Forum is taking place in Vladivostok, aimed at encouraging foreign investment in the sanctions-hit country. Reports suggest that Russian President Vladimir Putin could be about to meet with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, who is possibly attending the event. If the meeting goes ahead, the two men are expected to discuss the supply of arms from North Korea for Russia's war in Ukraine. DD India's Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow with more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin will have a tight agenda at the 8th edition of the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. The Kremlin says the top foreign guest is the Vice President of Laos, with whom President Putin will hold a separate bilateral meeting. Chinese Vice Premier is also due to attend, according to the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Putin will also hold a number of bilateral meetings with the heads of foreign delegations on the sidelines of the forum. Yet no mention was made with regard to the potential summit of the Russian president with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Western media reported earlier that Kim could meet Putin in Vladivostok, but the Kremlin did not confirm that. On Monday, the president is to review the results achieved in the development of Russia's Far East, and on the 12th of September, Putin is scheduled to deliver a speech at the plenary session. Over 7,000 participants from at least 50 countries are attending the forum. China, India, Myanmar, Mongolia and Laos are sending the largest delegations. The main focus of over 120 events is on fostering business dialogue, something that is of utter importance for Russia today, as it restructures its partnerships. Dasha Chernyshova, reporting in Moscow for DD India.
As the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues, Kyiv is trying to sustain its counteroffensive against Russian forces. Over the weekend, Ukraine denounced what it described as sham elections that took place in 4 Ukrainian regions occupied by Russia. Moscow said the United Russia Party, which backs President Putin, had won the ballots.
Ukrainian troops have made advancement on the southern front in the past week, as per the claims made by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a video message.
Firstly, the front line. Over the past 7 days, we have made advances in the Tabrian directions. There is a movement in the Bakhmut direction. There is a movement.
Further in the video message, the Ukrainian president also accused Russia of a car attack killing volunteers.
Near the town of Chasy, we are in Donetsk region. Russian terrorists attack a car of volunteers. Direct hit from an anti-tank missile system. As of now, we know for sure that Canadian citizen Anthony Inhart was killed. Unfortunately, the Spanish citizen Ima Igual is also probably dead. My condolences to the families. 2 more volunteers were taken to Dnipro hospitals.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken also took a dig at Russian President Vladimir Putin in an interview and said that Putin has already lost in what he was trying to achieve.
And keep in mind, Putin has already lost in what he was trying to achieve. He was trying to erase Ukraine from the map and its independence, subsume it into Russia. That has already been a failure. Now, where exactly this settles, where lines are drawn, that is going to be up to Ukrainians. But I've found a strong determination to continue to work to get their territory back that's been seized by Russia.
On the other hand, to mark its dominance, Russian-installed authorities held regional polls in southern and eastern Ukraine, including Donetsk. Polls which concluded on Sunday are also being condemned by Kyiv and its allies.
Memorials are being held across the United States to mark the 22nd anniversary of the attacks on 9/11. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives when hijackers crashed commercial planes into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania. It was the deadliest act of terrorism on American soil and triggered a seismic shift in U.S. national security. DD India's William Denslow reports from New York.
The mangled debris of the Twin Towers, preserved at the 9/11 Museum for future generations to understand the devastation caused and how it reshaped the world around us. But for many New Yorkers, the memory of that day remains fresh.
Thinking of the horrible way some of them died, being burned alive or jumping by the window at the 106th floor, that's not a memory that somebody can delete. It's just not possible.
Sekou Sibi was a banquet cook for a restaurant on the 107th floor of the World Trade Center's North Tower. He wasn't working the day the Twin Towers fell, but he lost his roommate and 73 colleagues on 9/11.
My hope is that as a society, we should learn from it and never allow a situation like that to happen.
More than 2,700 people died when hijackers crashed two commercial planes into the Twin Towers in Lower Manhattan, an event that's left the city's iconic skyline forever changed. This mural pays tribute to the more than 300 firefighters that were killed on 9/11. But in the years that have followed, over 300 first responders have died from diseases linked to the fumes released when the Twin Towers fell. That death toll continues to rise. New York's fire department has added 43 more names to its memorial wall for those that died from World Trade Center-related illnesses. The strikes on 9/11 radically changed the US's approach to national security. A number of new agencies were created to address the threat of terrorism. Experts say the impact of those attacks is still being felt today.
Terrorism is really a psychological weapon. We fear, right? So we fear for 20 years. And this is already their success.
Analysts believe the threat perception has gradually changed in the US since 9/11, with focus shifting to concerns over domestic terror and lone wolf attacks rather than major coordinated strikes by overseas groups. But 22 years on, and the pain caused that day is far from forgotten. William Denslow in New York reporting for DD India.
That's it from me here in London. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Julia. Julia Chapman, my colleague, joining us from the London Bureau. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. As President Macron visits, France signs Airbus deal with Bangladesh. Spanish football president Rubiales resigns after the Women's World Cup kiss scandal.
Always welcoming. The vibe of Punjab is larger than life. Warm up to grandeur that's beyond compare. And history that's dotted with tales of bravery. Smiling soul of India, where music, art, cuisine, culture comes together to create an unforgettable impression. Punjab is all set to win your hearts with its unique and colorful extravaganza.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Tanvi Taneja. After the G20 summit over the weekend, the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is backing India in its bid for a permanent seat at the reformed UN Security Council.
It's not only about the US, the UK, France, China, and Russia. I mean, those 5 countries. We don't only want to have those 5 countries on the Security Council of the UN. Right now, the permanent members of the Security Council and the non-permanent members of the Security Council, it's 5 plus 10. All of them, we should only have permanent members, and it should work on a rotational system. So we should have a rotational mechanism where potentially each and every member, every one of those 195 countries can potentially become a member.
So a lot is happening in South Asia right now. Vietnam and the US have unveiled billions of dollars worth of business deals during a visit by President Biden. As our correspondent Patrick Falk reports, it's an opportunity for Hanoi to take advantage of Washington's rivalry with Beijing.
Well, this is an absolutely critical relationship for Washington, and it has been talked about a lot in recent days in the context of China. But President Biden has been at pains to emphasize that the deepening of ties with Vietnam and indeed the strengthening of relations with the likes of India and the Philippines and Japan and South Korea is not about countering or containing China. It is very hard to see that as being the case, but as some observers have pointed out, this emphasis needs to be made so that the US's commitment to its partners in the Asia-Pacific comes across as being sincere. Either way, Vietnam may not necessarily mind because it stands to gain a lot. There have been a flurry of business deals signed over the last couple of days. The headline one going Vietnam's way being this $1.6 billion semiconductor factory for Amcor, which is going to be launched in October near Hanoi, which is going to be assembling and packaging and testing chips. It's also discussing business in the arenas of artificial intelligence and critical minerals as well. So again, a lot for Vietnam to take advantage of. And don't forget that Vietnam has always had a difficult relationship with China itself and is also embroiled in territorial disputes with Beijing within the South China Sea.
After G20, French President Emmanuel Macron travelled to Bangladesh, where he announced that Airbus will sell 10 A350 planes to their national carrier Biman Airlines. Macron met Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka. It's the first trip by a French president to Bangladesh in more than 30 years.
I'm most grateful for your warm welcome in Dhaka and for making our visit a great success. And I would also like to thank our friends around the table, be they from Bangladesh or France, who have gathered tonight in the spirit of friendship at the core of our relationship.
On to Africa now. It's now 3 days since the devastating earthquake in Morocco, and nearly 2,500 people are known to have died, with more than 2,000 others injured. Rescue teams are still looking for survivors after the 6.8 magnitude earthquake hit the nation. The rescuers are also finding more people who may have died. The nation is in 3 days of mourning, and King Mohammed VI has called for prayers nationwide. The king also thanked Spain, Qatar and the United Kingdom and the United Arab Emirates for providing relief aid following the destructive earthquake on Friday. 8 planes have already taken relief supplies to Morocco, and more aid is on the way. Survivors of Morocco's deadliest earthquake in over 60 years are struggling to find basic necessities like food, water and shelter. People have now spent 3 nights outside since the 6.8 magnitude quake shook the country. And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. At least 6 protesters have been arrested as they gathered outside the home of Israeli Justice Minister Yariv Levin. Demonstrations are taking place ahead of a hearing by the Supreme Court on Tuesday. It's an appeal against attempts by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to curb judicial powers. More than 150 rescuers are racing to save a sick American explorer trapped in a deep cave underground in Turkey. A team of rescuers successfully carried Mark Dickey part of the way out over the weekend to give him medical care. Now an Italian rescue team is trying to get him to the surface. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is erupting for the 3rd time this year. The U.S. Emergency Management Agency says it does not pose a lava threat, but volcanic gases may cause breathing problems. Kilauea is one of the world's most active volcanoes. There was violence between mass protesters and police in Chile on Sunday as demonstrators marked 50 years since a coup that led to years of a brutal regime under General Augusto Pinochet. In 1973, the military toppled Chilean President Salvador Allende. Over 3,000 people were killed and another 28,000 were tortured in political violence. On to some business updates now. The National Stock Exchange of India's benchmark Nifty 50 index reached an all-time high of 20,000 points today, and the market-weighted index Sensex has also moved closer to its own record high. Notably, the Nifty 50 recorded a substantial increase of 0.9% on Monday, while other Nifty's indices made stronger gains of more than 1%. This momentum helped major Indian stock exchanges to end the day in positive territory. And on to the sporting controversy, the kiss scandal controversy. Luis Rubiales has resigned as president of the Spanish Football Federation after he kissed Spain's forward Jenny Hermoso at the Women's World Cup winners' ceremony in August. The Spanish striker had said that the kiss was not consensual and she filed a legal complaint last week. Rubiales has submitted his resignation 3 weeks after the incident, which came during the medal ceremony after Spain beat England 1-0 to win their first global women's title. So with that, it's a wrap in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja. From all of us here in New Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Global. Namaskar.